The challenge to stop Iran from converting its nuclear technology into a nuclear weapon. And if Iran cheats, to give the world at least a year's warning before Iran could build a bomb. One idea, have Iran send its atomic fuel out of the country. But now, at the last minute, Iran has firmly ruled that out. John Kerry still thinks a deal is possible.
All right, let's get to work. Our guest is resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, a former Pentagon expert on the Middle East, and he teaches senior military officers about the politics of the region. Let's welcome Michael Rubin to MidPoint. Mike, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me, Ed.
We are right where we thought we would be several weeks ago. Here we have a deadline. It looks as if there is no real deadline at this point. This will go past midnight their time. It will go into June. So the simple question is, does Iran win by holding this off until June and once again refusing what America wants?
Well, absolutely. I think they've already won. You know, I'd really like to sell my used car to the American negotiating team. I could start off asking for $2,000 and settle at $10 million. That's the way we're negotiating. It's almost as if Secretary of State John Kerry is a gambler who simply is so desperate. He wants to put one more bet at the table, and then he can win everything back. And the Iranians are playing him like a fiddle.
With the Iranians, then, there is now a thinking process that, with or without a deal, their power rises in the region. They now become more important than they ever were because America's pulling out, because of all the various problems in that region. Is Iran now simply playing the perfect waiting game and becoming much stronger than we ever might have imagined?
Well, absolutely, that's the case. And all you need to do is listen to the Iranian influence operations. 10 years ago, they used to describe themselves as a regional power. Starting in 2011, they talked about themselves as a pan-regional power, meaning the Persian Gulf and the Northern Indian Ocean. Ever since this past November, they've been describing their strategic boundaries as both the Eastern Mediterranean and the Gulf of Aden. And when we look at what they're doing, for example, in Yemen and in Syria, we see it's not merely empty rhetoric. They're serious about this expansionism.
Do you think, as many others do, that they're simply just going to push this along as far as they can because while these negotiations are going on, they're still technically, quote-unquote, breaking the rules of what any deal would basically entail in the first place? They are continuing with their enrichment programs. They're continuing to find more fuel, if you will. All they're doing is just working it behind the scenes.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Ed. All you need to do is look at Hussein Mousavian, the former Iranian nuclear negotiator who talked about North Korea as a model to emulate rather than a regime to condemn. It's been 20 years since we signed an agreed framework with North Korea. And of course, today the CIA says that North Korea has nuclear weapons.
What is the end game here? Americans want to know if indeed John Kerry, the Obama administration, and others are, and let me put it frankly, kissing up to Iran and basically trying to prop them up. What is that end game?
Well, you see, it seems that President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry want to have a Hail Mahdi pass in order to have a legacy. They're willing to give up everything for the sake of a nuclear deal with Iran. They think that's going to make the region safe. Unfortunately, they don't understand that Iran isn't a status quo power. It's an ideological state. In both the Iranian constitution and the founding statute of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the prerogative that the purpose of the Islamic Republic is to export its revolution. All we're doing is empowering them. And this is why all our allies in the region, not only Israel, but Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, they are all apoplectic and starting to go their own way. We might want to give a 3 a.m. phone call the next time a crisis comes to Saudi Arabia, to Jerusalem, to Israel, to the United Arab Emirates. No one's going to pick up our phone anymore. We've lost our credibility.
That again comes to it. I need to go there right now then. With regard to that credibility, is it your opinion and the opinion of those you speak with that when America sits down at a table right now with regard to what they've done to Iran, countries like France, Russia, which doesn't trust us anyway, but all these other countries in the Middle East simply see America as a toothless and a possible feckless superpower at this point?
I think feckless is the word to choose. But let's look at, for example, the advance in Yemen of this Iranian-backed militia. They sat outside the capital, Sana'a, for 3 weeks. They were waiting for a reaction. None came, so they marched into the capital. They didn't overthrow the government, however. They waited for about 2 months. They were waiting for a reaction. None came, so they overthrew the government. Even our enemies can't believe how empty our red lines have become.
I hate to answer this, but a quick yes or no answer. Do you think June will come and there will be a deal?
No, I think June will come and we're agreed to talk some more, all the while Iran getting more concessions.
And that is the fear of many nations. Please hold on just a moment, Michael Rubin. We're going to turn to what is now being considered a true lost cause, where a major Middle Eastern power is threatening invasion. And America has tied its own hands, becoming useless in settling this issue as well. MidPoint will continue. Welcome back. Also, let's welcome back former Pentagon expert on the Middle East, Michael Rubin, joins us. Michael, let's go ahead and turn to Yemen here. There are those who believe that this country is already a lost cause, and this country is destined to be a haven for terrorists of all faiths and pretty much of all measures, simply because they will become that open land that pretty much anybody can take over at this time. What do you think?
Well, ultimately, that's a real concern. Yemen has been in this sort of situation before, back in the 1960s, when you had a full-blown civil war going in with both Egyptian and Saudi involvement. That said, what we've learned over the past many years is when you have ungoverned spaces and terrorists take root, that ultimately they can reach out and strike us. We should have had this warning back in 2000 with the USS Cole, which of course was struck off the coast of Yemen. We ignored that, and we had 9/11 the next year.
Let's talk about the Saudis here, because airstrikes, and then there's the thought immediately that usually airstrikes means boots on the ground. Do you see the Saudis putting a ground force into Yemen anytime in the near future?
I see the Saudis hiring a ground force. What Saudi Arabia brings to the table is money. What the Egyptians bring to the table is population. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a Saudi-Egyptian alliance take on the Houthis in Yemen, and also at the same time try to really crush out the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which has been turning portions of Yemen into a real no-go area.
But will Egypt allow themselves to basically become hired guns, and what advantage does that give them?
Behind the scenes, we've been trying to ignore former General Sisi, who's now the president, but he has launched a very broad a very broad strategy to counter extremism. Part of that means reforming the mosques and the religious schools, and part of that means taking on groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda affiliates in the Sinai Peninsula, which belongs to Egypt, but also in Yemen. And remember, Yemen and the Bab al-Mandab, which is that narrow waterway between Yemen and Djibouti, that's the gateway to the Suez Canal, so Egypt takes this very, very seriously.
How will this change things, though, when it comes to the Saudis? Because let's be very fair, you don't hear about Saudi invasion forces every single day. This is more of a government that enjoys the peace and enjoys counting their money. So if you put the Saudis in this position, how is this going to tilt the power in the Middle East overall? And add to that, can the Saudis be successful?
Well, the Saudis have had some interventions in the past. For example, 3 years ago in Bahrain, when it's on their borders, the Saudis will take it very, very seriously. But here's the problem. In the past, we've coordinated with the Saudis. Now we're not coordinating with the Saudis. And on one hand, people can say, hey, it's great that the Saudis are taking the initiation on their own, that the Americans aren't being dragged into this. On the other hand, this lack of coordination might hurt us down the line when the Saudis decide, why should we listen to Washington? Washington stopped listening to our concerns back during the presidency of Barack Obama.
How important to Iran is Yemen and gaining control there?
Well, Iran is an expansionistic power, at least ideologically. They want to put their proxies in control. Yemen is as important right now to Iran as is Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. That said, if Iran isn't stopped in Yemen, then you got to start looking towards Bahrain, towards eastern Saudi Arabia. The fact of the matter is, until they're pushed back, you can think of them almost like Vladimir Putin in Russia. Until they face pushback, they're going to keep on going.
Speculate if you can, Michael. If the Saudis get involved, whether it's their military or the Egyptian military or whatever boots on the ground that come in here, with those militaries and the way that they are run at this point, what would be the potential level of killing or disaster in Yemen?
Well, we're not going to be talking about shock and awe. We're going to be talking about Stalingrad. And, American diplomats might wring their hands at that. But when we remove ourselves from the battlefield, so to speak, then we have a very limited basis upon which to complain. The Saudis are going to do this Saudi style, and it ain't going to be pretty.
What exactly, then, is our smartest option at this point? American, our possibilities?
Well, there's no magic formula at this point. When a new president comes into the Oval Office, his or her political credibility is automatically restored. I mean, they get their honeymoon period. But when you lose credibility on the world stage, there is no regaining it, at least quickly. We're going to be digging ourselves out of this hole for years, if not decades to come.
Are we looking at, when you say decades to come, are we looking at another one of these 30, 40, potentially even 50-year conflicts?
Absolutely, we may be. When we look back at the history of Arab nationalism, that took at least 30 or 40 years to work its way through. We have the same thing with radical Islamism. Unfortunately, we diagnosed the problem early, and then the White House just wrung its hands about what should be prescribed. Should they give it an aspirin or something more serious? During which point, and it metastasized all over the place. Syria, Libya, Yemen. It didn't need to be this way, but this is the world we're living in. This is the consequence of leading from behind.
Consequence, perhaps, of not having someone in charge of the United States who understands foreign policy and maybe even who understands war in so many cases. Michael Rubin, always a fascinating time to spend with you. Thank you so much for your time. We'll look forward to the next.
Thank you, Ed.
All right. What exactly is religious freedom? And why are Christians now being assailed on being bigots and filled with hate? For that matter, what is the truth in Indiana regarding religious freedom? That's next on MidPoint.